Well, it's about time to talk about the diffusion of languages and religion, y'all. So if you're ready to get them brain cows milked, let's get to it. So the first thing you need to understand is that if a cultural trait is going to spread, that means it has to spread from some initial point, to which I say, duh. But there's a name for this point that you need to know, namely a cultural hearth. So when language families, languages, dialects, world religions, ethnic cultures, or gender roles begin to diffuse, they do so from some cultural hearth. And that's pretty easy to remember when you see that hearth almost looks like the word heart, and the heart is the central location from which blood is pumped, or one might say diffused, through the rest of the body. So with that, let's consider the first spatial diffusion of language. And in order to understand that, you need to know how human geographers categorize languages, and we're going to start from the largest category and get smaller from there. First, we have language families, which refer to a group of languages that have a common ancestral language. Now, that ancestral language, which is known as a proto-language, doesn't exist anymore, but the reason we know they did exist is because of similarities among that language's descendants. So, for example, the Indo-European family includes most of the languages spoken in Europe and in some places throughout Asia, while the Sino-Tibetan family includes Mandarin Chinese and a few other languages in the region. And by comparing the vocabulary and syntax of the various languages within those families, linguists have decided that they have descended from one of these long-forgotten proto-languages. But then we have language branches, which contain all the languages within a family. Now, each of these languages has similar grammar and syntax, but the speakers cannot understand languages from the other branches. So here within the Indo-European family, we have the Romantic branch, which includes French, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, and Italian. But here we have the Germanic branch, which includes German, English, Dutch, and several Scandinavian languages. And here's what you need to understand. Language speakers in the same branch can understand quite a bit of each other's languages. For example, the Romantic languages all descended from Latin, and when they wanted to refer to this thing, they called it mensa. In Portuguese, they call it mesa, and in Spanish, they call it, well, mesa. And to be clear, there are a lot of differences between the two languages, but if they're in the same room, they're going to look at this thing and they're going to say mesa. But if you get a German speaker in there, he's going to call it a tisch, and that's what we call a failure to communicate. And even though all three of these languages descended from Indo-European, they branched off long ago, and therefore they can't understand each other very well. And then one more thing about language branches. They tend to be spatially distributed in very concentrated areas. For example, speakers of Romantic languages are highly concentrated in southwestern Europe, while speakers of Germanic languages are highly concentrated in northeastern Europe. But wait a minute, look at that. Romantic languages are also highly concentrated in Central and South America, and Germanic languages in North America as well, and that's kind of weird. I wonder if there's some historical explanation for this. You know there is. Don't forget about what we talked about in the video for 3.5, namely that the historical processes of European imperialism and colonialism were responsible for the spatial diffusion of European languages into this region. Anyway, the final category is individual languages and dialects. And remember that a dialect is just a regional variation in how a single language is spoken. So for example, I was born in Michigan, and most people there refer to this as a crick, but where I live in Georgia now, we call it a creek. That's a difference in the dialect of American English, but any American English speaker would know that both words refer to the same body of water. And wouldn't you know it, dialects have distinct spatial distributions as well. If you call this an elevator, then you likely live here. But if you call it a lift, you likely live over here. Or if you call this an abrazo, you're probably from here. But if you call it an abrazo, then you're probably from here. Okay, now to put a bow on all of this, you need to understand how the diffusion of language can be visually represented. First, we can visualize it on a map. Here you can see the hearth of the Indo-European language family as it spread thousands of years ago throughout Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. And then second, we can visualize the diffusion of languages in charts. Here you can see that English is the most spoken language throughout the countries of the world, while Arabic comes in second. But third, diffusion is evident in toponyms, which just refers to the name of a place. For example, the government in India recently changed the names of several of its cities. What was Calcutta is now Kolkata, and what was Bombay is now Mumbai. And that's significant because Calcutta and Bombay were the names that English colonizers gave these places, and so changing toponyms reveals a major shift in the cultural landscape. But now let's turn the corner and consider how religions have diffused throughout history and continue to diffuse today. And just like languages or any cultural trait for that matter, religions diffuse from a cultural hearth. For example, the cultural hearth of Hinduism is India, the hearth of Islam is the Arabian Peninsula, and the hearth of Christianity is Israel. Now, ultimately, what determines how or whether a religion will spread comes down to whether it is a universalizing religion or an ethnic religion. Universalizing religions are those that can be planted and grown in any culture throughout the world. And here you have religions like Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, and Sikhism. So, for example, Christianity is present in every continent in the world except maybe Antarctica, but you know, what do I know? Maybe there are plenty of evangelical penguins down there. Anyway, the reason Christianity can spread like this is because this particular belief system doesn't come with any societal or cultural requirements for belief. So that means Christianity can be practiced in Kenya just as well as it can be practiced in Brazil. And to be clear, each group of Christians will have a unique cultural expression of the same faith, but the point is it's the same faith, and that's why Christianity and the rest of the universalizing religions can spread so easily. Now, by nature, universalizing religions lend themselves to diffusion, and typically it's by relocation or contagious diffusion. For example, Buddhism was carried from its cultural hearth to China, China by merchants and missionaries, and that would be relocation diffusion. But also because Buddhism offered an alternative to the Hindu caste system, which arranged the South Asian population into a rigid hierarchy, it also spread contagiously there as well. And then second, we have ethnic religions, which are belief systems that are characteristic of particular ethnic groups located in specific regions. And here you have religions like Hinduism, Judaism, and Shintoism. Now, ethnic religions are less amenable to diffusion because they are tied so closely to the culture from which it originated, and the beliefs and practices cannot be easily transferred to other cultures. For example, Hinduism is woven so closely to India's culture and past that it wouldn't work very well in other cultures. Like, you can't really plop the caste system on any culture in the world, and because that social hierarchy is so close to the heart of the belief system, that makes it more difficult to diffuse. But when ethnic religions do spread, it's usually through relocation diffusion like we see in the various Jewish enclaves throughout the world. Okay, click here to keep reviewing for Unit 3, and click here to grab my AP Human Geography Heimler Review Guide, which has everything you need to get an A in your class and a 5 on your exam in May. I'll catch you on the flip-flop. Heimler out.